I, for some reason, really wanted to know how good Minecraft enchantments would be in real life, so I pulled out the good old trusty tier list maker and started doing some research. Keep in mind that even though I know every enchantment in Minecraft, there is always a chance I forget some niche mechanic or even a basic one, so feel free to comment any mistakes down below and like the video if you enjoy. To avoid making mistakes, however, I used multiple Minecraft wikis, in-game testing, and plenty of Google searching about crustaceans, which we will have to get to. The tiers will be active hindrance, neutral, does very little, would find some use, really good, and universally impactful. Also, just as a quick mention, the tiers are ordered alphabetically and not in order, meaning that I value every enchantment around the same in each tier. However, feel free to go through and reorder them how you would in the comments, as I only didn't order them since there are so many variables in real life that there would be way too many things to consider to get a dead accurate placement. First up though is the F tier. F tier are enchantments that overall would do more harm than good. First up, to no one's surprise, Curse of Binding is the worst enchantment in real life. Having a piece of armor or clothing permanently bound to you until it breaks is not only gross but also pretty dangerous. You could actually commit some sort of torturous war crime where you force people to wear Curse of Binding pants or something like that so they'll never be able to go to the bathroom again. Or just as bad if we really stretch the definition of armor to potentially a face mask that would then theoretically be placed on your face to stop your breathing. That would be just an absolutely dangerous head trap that even Jigsaw would be jealous. The only positive application possible is with some sort of game show, but this enchantment would pretty much be only useful in that scenario. Otherwise, it's just a pretty depressing torture device. However, the other enchantment in F tier is actually not Curse of Vanishing and instead is Wind Burst. Wind Burst is a new mace enchantment that causes the smash attack of a mace to bounce you into the air. Even if we assume that you take no fall damage from this bounce, there is just no real application for this, and as a matter of fact, do you really want to be vulnerable and in the air after attacking someone with a mace? Because I can tell you right now, you will probably most likely hit a ceiling or a tree or something. This could be even worse if you are somehow on a battlefield, successfully hit someone, and then when you are flying into the air, the enemies will just see you floating in the sky and just shoot at you. Therefore, I need to put it in F tier. If you could theoretically use it without hitting something, then we'd be able to find some sort of application. But since you need to physically assault someone for this, it would just be too hard to use, and therefore is an active hindrance. After the unsurprisingly short F tier, it is now time for the D tier. This tier will consist of what I consider neutral enchantments that don't really do anything good or bad, or if they do a good or bad, it kind of evens out to neutral. First up is Smite. Smite is pretty much an absolute nothing enchantment, since it does more damage to undead mobs. In real life, there is basically no equivalent to undead mobs, with the closest things being something like rabies, which is a stretch. I don't really think rabies are undead, or parasites. So I guess if you need to kill something with a parasite controlling it, then I guess this enchantment is perfect. But realistically, you will never find yourself in this scenario, and I'm pretty sure the only thing that gets controlled by parasites are like ants that I can think of. Therefore, since we aren't considering conflictions, this is just a neutral enchantment. Soul Speed also falls into the issue of just not having a real-world equivalence. Soul Speed increases your speed on Soul Sand or Soul Soil. There is no such thing as Soul Sand or Soul Soil in real life, and therefore the enchant is useless. You could maybe stretch the definition to include deceased bodies, but hopefully you're never in this scenario where that will be useful. Next up is C tier with enchantments that technically have a use, like that are just barely better than neutral. As an example, I bet none of you expected this enchantment to be so high. It is Bane of Arthropods. If we don't consider conflicting enchantments for this tier list, then Bane of Arthropods technically has a niche. Arthropods are any of a phylum of invertebrate animals as insects, arachnids, and crustaceans, having a segmented body, jointed limbs, and a shell of chitin that is shed periodically. Now, killing insects and arachnids aren't exactly difficult, as we have bug spray and the good old holy bible to dispose of them. However, animals like crustaceans can be more difficult to kill. These include things like crabs, lobsters, and funny enough, barnacle, which doesn't seem to fit the description of an arthropod, but I'm not going to argue with Google. But anyways, it really isn't that hard to eliminate your favorite arthropod, but it's tactically useful enough to be above neutral. Next up is Cleaving, which is potentially an enchantment you've never heard of or seen, since it has been in limbo for years. This enchantment may get changed if or whenever it does get released, but from what I know, it increases damage and shield stunning. The effect on its own would be quite good in Minecraft PvP as shields are very strong, but I don't see people using shields in real life very often, and therefore it's sort of a nothing enchantment, but technically could be used if you ever did have to fight someone with a shield, but shield wielding individuals just aren't common. After, Cleaving is one you probably thought was much lower, and that was Curse of Vanishing. This is because I can think of one singular reason for this enchantment. The basic idea is to have a Curse of Vanishing item on someone who is dying in the hospital. Then when they perish, you will know for a fact that they are gone. Misjudging someone as dead isn't the most common thing ever, but it does still happen even with all our current technology. This of course wouldn't fix all scenarios of false presuming someone dead, but it is a use nonetheless. After that, we got Density. Density increases damage per block fallen. This just doesn't have much application. Each block in Minecraft is about 3 feet or 1 meter. This means that not only will you need a mace in the first place, which is the only weapon that this enchantment goes on, but you'll then need to fall from dangerous heights to get any real use out of it. And even worse is that most people don't need to physically fight for their lives anyways, and therefore it goes into the close to nothing category, but I guess technically still has the use of C tier. After that, we got Multi-Shot. Multi-Shot fires 2 extra arrows whenever you shoot it from a crossbow. Crossbows are not the most practical of weapons because of a funny little thing called gun, and the extra arrows aren't very useful since you would need multiple targets standing in perfect positions in order for you to hit both of them. And if we were considering conflictions, displacement would actually be lower since it conflicts with piercing, but since I am ignoring conflictions, Multi-Shot is technically not a downgrade in most scenarios, and it could theoretically do something. Punch is our next one, and it's an enchantment that is very hard to place since if you're shooting someone with a bow and arrow, you typically don't want them flying away after they are hit. But at the same time though, if they do fly away with the knockback, it isn't really a bad thing either, and it could actually lead to someone taking extra damage, but at the same time it could knock someone out of the way of your firing. So in conclusion, I would overall say that this enchantment does very little with its effect on a weapon that is outclassed by the famous gun. Next up will be our longest tier so far, being B tier. B tier will be items that will find some use, however the extent of that use will be pretty limited. Breach is an enchantment that potentially does something overpowered, but gets nerfed in the real world. Breach will ignore armor reduction, which seems pretty great. The issue is that it can only be applied to a mace, and most people don't have one of those in their back pocket. Now, even if maces suddenly became widespread, maces are actually really dangerous to the average person wearing armor already, but also being able to pierce a majority of someone's armor may make it the best melee weapon in combat. However, here comes our old friend, gun! And the mace's usefulness gets shot down just like the person wielding it. B tier feels like a healthy spot for it, since the enchantment would be devastating if you can land a hit on someone in combat, but the chances of that aren't as likely as you might think. Loyalty would be useful if you could put it on a hoe, but sadly you cannot. Loyalty is another near impossible enchantment to place. Loyalty makes it so your trident will come back to you after being thrown, unlike my father. For context, a trident is a 3-pronged spear that is typically 6 to 8 feet long, or around 2 meters. This is an awkwardly large item to be used in a practical sense, and sure you could use it in combat, but you would definitely not last long. The most practical application would be to pair it with the channeling enchantment, so I'll actually be placing it wherever I place the channeling enchantment. I wonder what we're gonna talk about next. Next up is the channeling enchantment. I'm sure no one could have guessed that was coming up. The channeling enchantment is almost universe breaking as you can summon lightning wherever you want given setup. At first I thought this could be used as a great source of energy, but apparently there isn't enough research in this field to make it an effective and safe energy source out of lightning. However, I personally believe that if we had the channeling enchantment in real life, that we would eventually find some way to harness lightning, but in reality there's so many hurdles in the way, with the first one being that you would have to have a thunderstorm in the first place. This means the effectiveness of whatever you are trying to do is completely affected by the weather. On top of that, thunderstorms are exactly the safest things ever and would lead to many injuries. But even if we somehow managed to solve all the previously mentioned issues, we would still have to strike something with that lightning. At first this doesn't seem like a problem, but if you throw a trident into a random block in Minecraft, you'll notice that nothing happens.
Hi Kendall Gamers, I'm the editor. It appears that Kendall forgot that lightning rods exist. please roast them in the comments. You can strike blocks with lightning. Peace.
But overall, there are so many issues with trying to harness lightning that it would be dangerous and probably not worth it. At worst though, it could be a weapon of mass destruction in war, as long as it's thunderstorming of course. Next up is fire aspect, which also suffers from some unfortunate roadblocks in real life. First is needing to start a fire in the first place. Starting a fire to cook food would be the #1 scenario for this, but that adds a complication. If we are being generous, only swords and axes and maces can have this enchantment. Carrying around a giant piece of metal to do the same thing that a lighter could do just isn't convenient, and you also have to consider that you need to hit an entity to light your campfire or grill. All in all, a lighter just fixes all of these issues. However, I will give in and say that this would greatly improve the deadliness of these weapons in combat. But since you really would rather have a gun in combat, I'm going to put it in B tier since it would be very effective if the scenario arose where you did hit someone, but a certain funny firearm would be better. Speaking of projectiles, flame is in the same boat as fire aspect, where it's just inconvenient to use beyond casually assaulting someone. You could argue which one is better, but they're in the same tier and I find them roughly equal, so flame is going in B tier also. Next up is Frostwalker, and it's a bit odd. It temporarily freezes water so you can walk over it, and it also lets you walk over magma without hurting yourself. Walking over water would be fun, while walking over magma would be more useful, but also wouldn't be useful since you'd probably just have a heat stroke while doing so, and if you trip, you're definitely dead. However, I guess it'd be somewhat useful in odd scenarios. I just can't really think of those scenarios. You could argue this deserves C tier, but I feel like I'm missing something if I'm going to be honest with you. Like, there has to be some sort of application for Frostwalker that I'm just not thinking of, which is why it's in B tier.
I'm back. Kendall forgot about the Titanic. I feel like the people on that boat would have wanted Frostwalker boots, am I right? Or anyone in a shipwreck, maybe even like a plane crash on the ocean. It's useful, bump that to S tier.
Comment down below what you think, actually. That's kind of the whole point of the comment section. Next up is Infinity, which actually on the tier list I'm using, Infinity was missing. I don't know how that happened. But Infinity prevents consumption of normal arrows on a bow. This would make a bow way more convenient to use, since you wouldn't ever run out of ammo. However, you are still using a bow over the pristine and all-powerful gun. But on its own, Infinity would be so nice to have. It's B tier since my conscience can't put it any higher, but I can't understate how good this would be for bow users. If only the bow class wasn't stuck to B tier in my mind. Next up is Knockback. Knockback in Minecraft is a give and take enchantment. In some scenarios, you want to knock something off a cliff, while in other scenarios, it will knock a mob out of your effective range. In real life, however, I would argue that it is much more useful, since you'll be able to knock melee threats away from you. The only downside being that it would be on a sword, which as a general rule is over 1 foot long, and therefore it will become an issue since carrying around a 1 foot long blade is just not very practical, and at that point you may as well just have a, say it with me, gun. I can't imagine this enchantment being used in every day, but it's really not that bad and could be incorporated into like some hunter's arsenal, I guess, if they want to carry around the sword, so if a leopard attacks them they can push it back. But this enchantment really could be in C tier for all I care. Speaking of hunting, next up is Impaling. Impaling does more damage to aquatic mobs in Java Edition, or it increases the damage to mobs in water or rain in Bedrock Edition. Either way, this enchantment is limited to the trident, and that really limits its use. I'm sure it would find some use in spearfishing, but not too much more than that. After that, we got Piercing. Piercing, I think, is one of the shockingly underrated enchantments in real life. Piercing lets crossbow arrows go through multiple entities. If we translate this to real life, this basically means that it would make crossbow arrows pierce through any person, including people wearing bulletproof, or I should say more accurately, arrow-proof vests. I still don't think this enchantment would single-handedly make crossbows better than, you know, guns. But there could be an argument to be made that in some scenarios, the crossbow would actually be better. Speaking of bows, next up is Power. Power simply increases arrow damage. This on its own is amazing and has no downsides. The only issue is the magical little item that all Americans love and know, and freaking, it's a gun. It's a gun. Guns are pretty much outclassing bows and crossbows in every scenario. But that doesn't mean this enchantment is directly bad. So it's going into B tier, but just remember that this enchantment is being capped out by the firearm category. Next up is another crossbow enchantment. It's Quick Charge. Quick Charge suffers from being only on the crossbow. It decreases the charge time, aka the reload of the crossbow, which would be so useful on the gun that we have been talking about all day, but unfortunately it doesn't apply to a gun. Crossbows aren't used very often, but would probably be amazing on those crossbows if we did use them. Next up is Sharpness, and Sharpness is definitely the biggest fraud of the enchantments in real life. It increases melee damage of only swords and axes, which most people are probably not slugging around with them. If you thought a bow was impractical in combat, melee weapons are probably even worse. I'm going to put Sharpness in B tier since it is potentially the best melee enchantment for combat, but its distribution limitation really sucks. Also, I don't know if I've really mentioned this, but how often are you in combat? You're really not. And that lack of combat in real life is really what tanks all of these ratings. Also, the fact that guns exist. Next up is Sweeping Edge, and it increases sweeping attack damage on swords. This is probably less useful than Sharpness, but they would probably find equal use. And you may as well have both Sweeping Edge and Sharpness on a sword. This would actually be a useful scenario where ranking within the tiers would be useful, since I could put Sharpness at the top of the tier and Sweeping Edge at the bottom of the tier. But since I'm categorizing them in alphabetical order to save my mental power, feel free to comment down below what order you would put them in within the tier. And finally, in B tier is Swift Sneak. Swift Sneak increases sneaking speed, and I don't really think people need this. There isn't that many practical senses for it, but you may as well have it for if you're ever crouching around your house, I guess. I guess it's fun. It really doesn't do much, but I'm sure some secret agent out there is just waiting to try it out. This is another one of those enchantments I'd be fine in C tier. You know what comes after the letter B? A, of course. Next up is A tier, which are going to be enchantments that are just really solid. Many of these enchantments basically have no downside, and most likely just barely missed out on S tier. First up is Aqua Affinity. Increased underwater mining speed would be situational, but would be very useful in those situations. Since Aqua Affinity can only be put on helmets, this means that this enchantment would unfortunately not be able to go on machines to increase their mining speed underwater. So this enchantment wouldn't find everyday use for most people, but would find tons of use in anything revolving around water, even if it was just a safety measure. Next up is Blast Protection. Blast Protection is much more useful in real life than in game. This is because the protection enchantments conflict with each other. Wherever an explosion can be found in game, you'd probably much rather have the all-purpose protection enchantment, as there will inevitably be another source of damage. In real life, however, individuals who work with explosions will easily prefer this over protection. This would also be a useful enchantment in war zones, however this runs into the issue of multiple damage sources. So I do fear that A tier might be a little bit high since it conflicts with other enchantments, but since I'm not considering conflictions, A tier I think fits perfectly, since it would have a great use in any area involving potential explosions, and it would then save people's lives. After that, we got Depth Strider. Depth Strider is super simple. You swim faster in water. Obviously, you're not working in water every day, but you'd probably want this whenever you are. Therefore, since it's really good, it's A tier, and it doesn't really conflict with anything, so you may as well have it on your shoes. Okay, actually, I'm wrong. It conflicts with Frostwalker, but I mean, I already kind of... We're not considering conflictions. Why am I even considering this? After the water enchantment, we got the fire enchantment of Fire Protection. Fire Protection would clearly be used to save people from fires. Fires are so common, in fact, that a whole entire occupation is based around them. So it's safe to say that this enchantment would get used. Yet it is just a tad too circumstantial for me to put in S tier, and instead it will reside in A tier. Kind of realized that A tier is kind of like the super specific enchantment tier that would be really good. Next up is Riptide, and it's just a fun enchantment. This I was going to put in B tier, but I was kind of convinced to put in A tier just because. With Riptide, you launch yourself in rain or water. I can't imagine this being used in everyday society since there would be tons of injuries or risky contraptions that would probably get people killed. But just imagine, instead of driving a car, you get to Superman yourself to work or something, or go through a giant fish tank. As with the other trident enchantments, I have mentioned that tridents aren't that convenient to have around, but I could definitely see a lifeguard or someone eject themselves into the ocean to save someone. So I really was bouncing between A and B tier, but I actually landed on A tier, like I said, just because it sounds so fun, and I'm sure I'm missing some sort of use case. If nothing else, this is just an insanely fun enchant to go swimming with, as long as you don't hurt anyone. Also, oh my god, I just thought of something stupid. Go on to the next one. It's the last one in A tier, Silk Touch. Silk Touch was actually the hands down hardest enchantment to place. I am unfortunately not smart enough to know when not breaking something would be a useful application, because in most scenarios you could just be careful instead. I really don't know how this enchantment would even work in real life. However, my instincts tell me that there are plenty of scenarios where this would be useful. As an example, if you want to collect some sort of material without breaking it, Silk Touch would be perfect. Sorry that I couldn't give a better explanation for this one, but feel free to comment what you think, because I'm actually very curious to see what the best application for Silk Touch is. And finally, it is time for the S tier. S tier, as the name implies, are the best enchantments, and to me would be universally impactful. First up is efficiency. Efficiency increases mining speed. Do I need to say more? This would go on every tool that you could possibly think of, and even if this was only limited to picks, axes, hoes, and shovels, this enchantment would be used worldwide in so many scenarios. This is easily an S tier enchantment. Next up might be a little surprising, and that is Feather Falling. Feather Falling is an enchantment that every person on the planet should and hopefully would have. Just having straight up a safety net from falling is insanely good and impactful. You could even stretch the definition of the enchant to include tripping, since it literally just decreases all fall damage. Elderly people should rejoice. After that, we got Fortune. Fortune is potentially the most broken and universe-changing enchantment in real life. This comes down to the fact that we aren't limited by the rules of Minecraft. Fortune increases the drop chance of something. This means that if you mine a diamond ore, you will get more diamonds. However, unlike in Minecraft, you can theoretically turn your diamonds into diamond ore using stone or some other material to make it count as an ore. This basically means that you are creating infinite diamonds, assuming you are capable of mixing the diamonds and stone into ore. However, even if Fortune only works on natural resources and not man-made ores, this would still be an S tier enchantment because it'd still be used everywhere. Very similar to Fortune is looting. Looting increases mob loot. This means that in a slaughterhouse, if you kill a pig, you will get more pig. So since this would be used basically everywhere, this is an S tier enchantment. Next alphabetically would be Luck of the Sea. Luck of the Sea increases the rate of good loot. In real life, this has questionable outcomes on what it would do, so for now I'm just going to assume it magically generates items like the enchanting books for us, which would make this S tier. However, if we were to go a bit more realistic and say that only treasure found up in the ocean gets washed up, this would still most likely give us random loot like metals when we fished. This one is super hard to judge since it's complicated on what it should do in real life, but quote-unquote good loot would only have a positive impact in real life. Feel free to comment what you think it would do. Staying on topic of fishing, Lure. Lure decreases the time for bites. As long as we don't destroy the ocean's ecosystem, this is such a spectacular enchantment. This is basically like looting but for fishing, so it deserves S tier. Next up is Mending, which is either a clear S tier enchantment or potentially a complicated enchantment depending on how it works in real life. It repairs items using experience, so the obvious question is, what is experience in real life? We could either translate this to knowledge, so your items will get repaired as you learn stuff, or we could just look at how you get XP in Minecraft and say that those actions will mend your items. I personally like the second option better, since it gives us an exact guideline on what would repair items, while also letting me avoid the question of what would happen to your gap in learning if we were to do the first option. So since I don't want to answer that question, we will say that Mending will work as long as you are doing an action from Minecraft in real life that would give you XP. This would make it S tier. Mending would still be S tier in real life. Are you surprised? Because I'm not. After that, we actually got Projectile Protection. Projectile Protection reduces damage from projectiles, which is unsurprisingly very useful in real life. I unfortunately couldn't find a solid statistic on this, but as a general rule, firearms were actually one of the top ways to die if you exclude health problems. This means that if everyone was to start wearing projectile protection clothing, we would hopefully have a lot less firearm deaths. Therefore, I'm going to put this enchantment in S tier since it would likely save many people every day. Speaking of protection, regular protection is just as good, and I would argue even better than projectile protection, since it would come up way more often, but it'd probably save less lives overall since projectiles are just that dangerous. Although this is just speculation, and like I said, I couldn't find any good stats on this.
Not Kendall forgetting that car crashes exist. I feel like protection would be a lot more useful for that. I think that's it for me, so I'll see you guys Goodbye.
But luckily, we don't have to argue about it since they are both in S tier anyways. Next up, we got Respiration. Respiration lets you breathe underwater longer. Respiration would likely save many lives every day and help in any scenario with water. I was thinking about putting it in A tier next to Aqua Affinity since most people aren't around water every day. At least enough water to make you drown, of course. But Respiration would probably be used by everyone at some point, even if it was just to go for a nice swim. Therefore, its probable wide and common usage lands it in S tier, although I would be okay with A tier. Next up, shockingly, is Thorns. Thorns is one of the most universe-changing enchants in real life, and here's why. Forcing someone to take damage anytime they hurt another person would encourage people not to fight each other, hopefully. This is my personal pick for the most underrated enchant in real life, and deserves S tier in my opinion, of course, since it would hopefully make an amazing impact on stopping human violence. I could see this enchantment backfiring, but I really don't want to ignore the potential good it would do. And finally, Unbreaking is S tier. It reduces durability damage. Your favorite Nintendo DS now will last like 3 times longer. You're welcome. And that is all the current enchantments tiered by how good they would be in real life. I do tend to miss a few details in my videos, so as always, feel free to comment what you would change, and please like and subscribe so I can see you all later.